We continue now here at the core in the module of the Disciple of Christ. And the title of the message we're going to see now is in our book, Walking in Peace with Men. An introduction, Matthew chapter 5, verse 9 says, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the children of God." Can we make peace with others? One of the biggest obstacles in life is the strife and conflict that arises between us and other men. Whether a believer or non-believer, men are what stand in the way of our peace on earth. Man has sought this peace for all time here on earth, and yet it seems to be a constantly unattainable thing, right? Because we want peace. It's hard because there's always differences. It's the desire of God that we walk in peace with all other men, no matter how difficult it may seem. Jesus did so while he was here, setting the standard for us to follow. And you think, well, Jesus didn't walk in peace with everyone. In fact, he said he didn't even come to bring peace, but division. But I'm talking about relationship peace. I'm talking about Jesus did not get into a stressful position with anyone, and we're going to talk about that in a minute. But this message, what we're going to see here is a look at the teachings of Christ that will help us to develop the skills needed to successfully live a peaceful life in spite of the differences between us and others. And there are some things we're going to see to be able to walk in peace. It's really about understanding yourself and understanding what God has done in your life. So in the message, we see three parts: the state of man, what Jesus thinks of man, and how to live in peace with man. Very simply put. So we're going to start with the state of man by turning to Romans, and this is chapter 3, beginning in, let's start in verse 9. "What shall we conclude then? Do we have any advantage? Not at all. For we have already made the charge that Jews and Gentiles alike are all under the power of sin." And this is a fact. And you know that all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. But here he's talking about this sin. It gets interesting here. "As it is written, there is no one righteous, not even one. There is no one who understands. There is no one who seeks God. All have turned away. They have together become worthless. There is no one who does good, not even one. Their throats are open graves. Their tongues practice deceit. The poison of vipers is on their lips. Their mouths are full of cursing and bitterness. Their feet are swift to shed blood. Ruin and misery mark their ways, and the way of peace they do not know. There is no fear of God before their eyes." Now I want us to consider this. This is very important as we look at this passage, because we are considering the state of man. This passage of Scripture gives us a grim yet factual view of the state of man. There is nothing right about man in his basic nature ever since the fall of Adam and Eve in Eden. We are sinful and without hope apart from God. Now, I need you to comprehend something that's going on here in this passage. You think, well, this is a description of the sinner. This is a description of someone who did not know Jesus. No, this is a description of us all. Because in this passage in writing and in other parts of Romans, Paul gladly includes himself in this. This is a description of Paul. This is a description of you. This is a description of me. And it can be so offensive to someone when they have exalted themselves and have taken pride, believing they are somewhat a good person. I keep warning you against what Jesus says, that he spoke things against those who trusted in themselves. And the whole secret is not to trust in yourself at all. And you start by understanding the depraved natural state of us all because of sin, and that sin imputed. We are born in this mentality of sin. We are born in darkness. And our instincts are always going to be evil almost all the time. Our only hope is that God somehow, some way can circumvent our humanity and use us in spite of us to do something good. And even that he usually has to trick us into doing. And I know we're always looking for these valiant people that do right things and good things, and we can say that's a good man or that's a good woman. But we're talking here, first thing we need to get in touch with is the state of man, as we just read. We must also understand that our instincts are to do evil at every turn. This is what I'm reading from the book again. To do evil at every turn, though we are now serving God. So this human nature is what we must conquer on a daily basis. It doesn't go away. Just because you confess and receive Jesus doesn't mean you are suddenly perfected and that the state of you changes. You are still who you are. Paul was trying to make a point to all those who felt justified in their own deeds. And that's where he writes in that context about people who had the idea of self-justification and concerning their religious activities. And he's trying to make a point. Later he makes the statement that all have sinned. He also includes himself in this category of humanity. So the sooner we realize the truth about ourselves and others, the sooner we will know what we must do to live in peace. There's a trap that the devil sets for us that tells us that we are all right as we are and that we just need to believe in ourselves. And this is not true. The scriptures make it very clear that we are destitute in our sin. Somehow we forget that what we were before Christ, and we seem to think that we are responsible for our new righteousness. Like we made a choice and therefore we're doing good and we feel good about that. But remember that it's a gift of God. And that's exactly what the scripture says. You're saved not by works, but you're saved by grace. And not by works, by faith. And that faith is not even yours. It's a gift given to you. God gave you a measure of faith supernaturally, sovereignly. That means God is the source of your salvation. God is the source of your righteousness. And flesh and blood doesn't even reveal Christ to you. It's the Father in heaven. So there's nothing good at all. Nothing in us. There's no origin in us of goodness. It's not there. And we'll say, well, I'm made in the image and likeness of Christ, and therefore I think like Jesus. No, that's not even you. That is the Holy Spirit trying to eke out of you some goodness, but it is not yours. It's His. And as long as we're trying to perpetuate some goodness out of humanity, we will always be deceived. We have nothing. We are nothing. When you realize your worthlessness before God, when you humble yourself under the mighty hand of God, then and only then does He have something to work with. And this is why in life, when you build up a certain perspective of goodness and you do good works and you feel good about that, and you give yourself an attaboy and pat yourself on your back and I'm doing pretty good, and you check off all your boxes and you dot your I's and cross your T's and feel great about doing good things, that is a moment where God finds very little use for you. God is not looking for self-confident people. I mean, they might be in the corporate world, but God is looking for people with an understanding of what I'm talking about here. That's how we walk in peace. We can walk in peace with everyone if we get this in our hand. And the sooner we realize this truth, we will grow. And that's what it says here. We realize this truth about ourselves and about others. The sooner we realize it, the sooner we will know what we must do to live in peace. So avoid that trap. Remember, it's a gift from God. The bottom line is that we are evil from birth and mostly concerned with evilness. Our instincts are to do evil deeds and selfishly provide the desires of our own lusts at all times. This is the state of man. And this is why people in every relationship will let you down and betray you eventually, even if they seem to be the perfect image of Jesus, even if they're a great guy, a great sister or brother in the Lord, or a great husband or a great wife or a great brother, best friend, whatever. Sooner or later they're going to let you down, and we soon find out that they too are evil in some way. Well, Surprise, surprise. That's ridiculous that you would think that they could be good. And the problem that occurs is when we decide to treat all with contempt, knowing that the truth about man is not an excuse for rejecting all men, so that we see a pendulum swing. We have this basic concept in our minds that some men are good, there's good people, there's bad people, so therefore the good people, we hang around with the good people, and we are confident in that they will never do us any harm, they will never hurt us. No, in fact, when we think that, and when we put someone on a pedestal, it calls God's attention to that form of idolatry when man becomes an idol in our life. We see this happen in marriage. Very often a wife will exalt their husband to a high position and put him on this pedestal. That's a cruel thing to do to him, because inevitably, unavoidably, he's going to mess up. And when he does, she's devastated and she's shocked and betrayed because her husband has done this thing. Her husband always was that thing. Her husband always did that. It's the same with a husband toward a wife. This is why there will be sins. This is why there will be even adultery and issues. And if you're not prepared for those mistakes taking place, then you're setting yourself up for defeat and disaster. You're setting yourself up for the betrayal. You are inviting betrayal. And as I said, when God sees us deify humans, when God sees us hold people up in this high standard, all he does is look down and simply pull back a little, his hand of grace, so that our human pride and trust will cause a fall, and then that individual we've exalted will be dethroned. And it's not their fault. They're not climbing up on that throne. You're putting them there. And so this is a pitfall in relationships. And that's why people in every relationship will let you down and betray you eventually. Even if they seem to be the perfect person, they're just like Jesus. So you have to be very careful about your expectations, or God himself will come and remedy that. So the problem that occurs is when you decide to treat other people, the other swinging of the pendulum is now you get to the point, because you've been betrayed and hurt, and your fault, by the way, you're the one that exalted the people, but now you've been betrayed and hurt, and you feel devastated. So now you look at everyone with skeptical eyes. You look at everyone as someone who's going to hurt you, and that's okay. But the problem is when you hate people because of your unforgiveness. Then you're angry at all of humanity, and you hate the group. You usually pick on a group. Like if it's a man that hates you, then you hate men. Maybe a woman was mistreated by a father, maybe even an uncle or something, or a brother. Maybe she was molested, and now that betrayal, that hurt, that deep sense of pain causes her to brand everyone within that category, that demographic, and develop a spirit of hating men. Or vice versa, if a man loved a woman and that woman betrayed him and betrayed his trust, then he develops a mentality to hate, a woman-hating spirit, to hate all women, and they're all evil, and want to degrade them and hurt them. And all this comes out of the cauldron of unforgiveness. But that, if you proceed the whole process, why did you have to hold a grudge and hate? It's because you placed too much emphasis on trust. You placed too much hope in a failed creation because of sin. All are corrupt in sin. So now you're trusting humanity. You're trusting that people will be good somehow. And when they, within all that they can, are good to some degree and create an image of goodness, because you don't really know what's in the heart of their heart. The bitterness of one's own heart is only known by its heart. So those people, you put them up, you set yourself up for it. And that's not a wise move on our part. So yeah, we get angry and we start. So knowing the truth about man, this is where I say it, is not an excuse for rejecting all men, but it's simply the start of knowing how to truly love man with God's love. If you can understand who they are, then you can love them. The difference between our earthly love and God's heavenly love is this. Our love, philos, is based on what we do for each other. It's a recompense that we do. You do for me, I do for you. And that's why it ends when you betray me. If you don't do your part, I won't do my part. It's contractual. It's a contractual obligation of benefits reciprocated. And if you don't do the right thing, you will be penalized and rejected, and then you will be punished. That is the way that the world works. But God's love, however, agape, is unconditional and is constant regardless of betrayal. You cannot stop it. That's why it says that what can separate us from the love of God? Nothing. What can separate us from the love of men? Practically anything. So if we possess God's love, we're able to love all men at all times, no matter what they do or have done or will do, and therefore we live at peace with man. You understand, the lack of peace that comes and the stress and the strife has to do with our guilt of high expectations on humanity. It's not fair to human beings to believe they're good in any way. We must accept this. It sounds cynical and dark, and I'm just looking for the bright, happy, I want a very optimistic view of life. Well, that's naive on your part to think that that's even a reality. And I'm just going by the very scriptures that we're reading here, that where it says that their throats are open graves, their tongues practice deceit, the poison of vipers is on. Actually, you can read all this about yourself. I have turned away. I have become worthless. I am never doing good. None of us could ever do good. My throat is an open grave. My tongue practices deceit. The poison of vipers is on my lips. My mouth is full of cursing and bitterness. My feet are swift to shed blood. Ruin and misery mark my ways, and the way of peace, I don't even know it. And there's no fear of God in me because I do these things. I can say that without feeling I'm misrepresenting the truth. I believe that. If I read it in that way, I believe that is actually true. And I know that. And when you say, well, you sound like a horrible person. No, I sound like someone who's realistic about himself in humanity. And if we understand this, then our desperation for dependence upon the Holy Spirit can finally be enacted. Trusting in Him alone requires that you learn not to trust yourself, nor humanity as a whole. If you want to operate in the love of God, if you want to operate in the agape love of God, in the real power of God, you're going to have to stop playing these childish games, believing that there's goodness. There is no goodness. Adjust yourself in that understanding, and God will do great things in and through you. So, we do this by following our mentor, right? Who is Jesus. What Jesus thinks of man is very important. I want us to go then to John chapter 2, verses 23 through 25, where it clearly says that now while He, Jesus, was in Jerusalem at the Passover festival, many people saw the signs He was performing and believed in His name. But Jesus would not entrust Himself to them, for He knew all people. He did not need any testimony about mankind, for He knew what was in each person. So here we're learning about what Jesus knew and understood about humanity. We see Jesus setting a standard that enabled Him to live in peace with men throughout His ministry on earth. Why? Because of what John assesses. And so maybe they hated Him, but He never hated them. He came to His own, they received Him not. He didn't run away pouting. He had an understanding of the fact that that's just the way people are. And that's where this passage is so valuable for us to gain wisdom from Jesus. And I like that John wrote it. John is the disciple whom Jesus loved. John understood and picked up on this and articulates it in his gospel. That while Jesus was in Jerusalem, the Passover, many people, they saw the signs He was performing. They believed in Him. He's great. They celebrated Him. The fanfare was there. But no matter what they felt, Jesus, John says, He wouldn't trust Himself to them. He didn't put Himself in a position of contractual agreements. In other words, He didn't allow them to enter into a relationship with Him that depended upon them doing their part. You understand? That's what this really means. Because He knew they would all miserably fail. For he knew all people. He knew humanity. He knows humanity. Jesus knows humanity. There's nothing you can do to surprise Jesus in your relationship with him. There's nothing you can do, nothing out of your humanity can broadside Jesus and surprise him. He's not going to be in shock. Oh, I had no idea you were so dark. He knows exactly who you are. And he didn't need anyone to testify about mankind, because the testimony can't be true, because man is always going to cover their sins and try to project themselves as being something of a benefit or something good. He knew. He knew already. Why? Because he knew what was in each person. He saw the inside. And this is the key, to see the inside. And years ago, the Lord showed me the inside of me. The scariest thing the Lord ever showed me, of course this is years ago, and he never had to show me a second time, was he showed me myself. He showed me the dark, black abyss of my reality. And when he did, I realized that I was 100% destitute and completely incapable of ever being good at all. And when he showed me that blackness, he showed me also his hand of grace, more like his fist of grace wrapped around me. And he showed me that if he were to open that hand of grace even a little bit, I would run with all my might straight to the lake of fire instantly. Because that's who I am. And that reality set me free in so many different ways. And many people are not ready to be able to see that kind of thing. They cannot possibly accept that truth. To quote Jack Nicholson in the movie A Few Good Men, you can't handle the truth. You know, that a lot of people cannot handle the truth. But the truth is exactly what Jesus knew. He didn't entrust himself in, but he knew all people. He didn't need anybody to testify about man. He knew what was inside of them. He knew the black abyss. But even with that knowledge of who we are and what we are, he loved us. The passage goes on in verse 24, but Jesus would not entrust, it says there, Jesus would not entrust himself to them. He limited their exposure to his life and was careful with them in the relationships that he developed. So like Jesus, we must be careful with the depth to which we allow people access to our personal thoughts and feelings. Many people will use our intimate secrets as ammunition against us when they betray us. And these people who walk in darkness, as we all do, many people, they just want to get inside of our head. Sometimes not for the right reasons. There are very few people that we can truly consider friends, and we should cherish them. If you come across a real friend, you should cherish them. That's one of the greatest things I ever learned. I'll never forget it. It was from my father-in-law, Manny Cohen, who was a Jewish man from New York, who was in the Second World War, and he was a tail gunner in a B-29 bomber, which had the highest, in the Air Force, that was the highest mortality rate of any position. Why? Because you're a tail gunner. And the Japanese planes, or the German planes, would come from behind and shoot, and that tail gunner would be the first one to die. Well, he survived missions, and his plane was struck and caught on fire, and it crashed, and they crash landed, and he jumped out of the tail gun section, got out, and ran to the front of the plane where the pilot was trapped in flames. And he broke in there, burnt his hands, burnt himself up severely, but he broke and rescued and drug out the captain of the aircraft, the pilot, and saved his life. But his hands were so severely burned that he was put in a medical unit for a very long time, and they had to use grafts of skin from his own body, from his rear end and his thighs, to put skin back on his hands. And he eventually healed. But by the time he healed and his hands were usable enough for him to be reinstated or put back into military service. It was just near the end of the war. And right at that time, he was put back into active duty out of the hospital. And his first mission was for him to go, and he was part of the troops that went in to liberate Auschwitz, the camp. And he witnessed with his own eyes the emaciated bodies of his Jewish brothers. And he carried them out, and he saw all these things. He saw so many things in life. It was always hard for me to get in and talk about them when he did. So he possessed a lot of wisdom. And one of the greatest things he ever told me, one of the wisest things he ever said, is one day out in out of nowhere, he said, "Let me tell you something, boy." I said, "Yes, sir." He said, "In life, if you have one or at most two real friends, you are a rich man." And he said there are many people out there that say these friends, that friends, other friends, but real friends are a very, very rare commodity. And if you find one, cherish him. And he left me that wisdom, and I totally understand that. There are very few people out there that you can say are really friends. Jesus understood this. Jesus taught us these examples. There are very few people out there. Jesus only trusted a few of his disciples with his more intimate secrets, like what he showed them on the Mount of Transfiguration in the 17th chapter of Matthew. After 6 days, Jesus took with him who? Peter, James, and John, the brother of James, and led them up a high mountain by themselves. There he was transfigured before them. His face shone like the sun, and his clothes became as white as the light. Just then there appeared before them Moses, Elijah, and Elijah talking with Jesus. So this was Jesus showing them the most intimate part of himself, his divinity. And he did not show this to the whole 12. He didn't show this to the 70. He showed this to only a few. In fact, those same few, very rarely, those Peter, James, and John were the ones that went with him into very specific places. They were the ones he took to the garden in the end when he was wrestling with whether or not to drink from the cup, if it's possible that this cup pass from me. Peter, James, and John were. That's why John was able to record the words that he spoke, because they were right there, present. A stone's throw away, enough that they could hear what he was saying. The rest didn't see that, because Jesus had guarded relationships, and what he considered to be real friends was not everyone. Of the many thousands of people, he only spent time with some particular people. And for you to be able to live at peace with men, you have to understand that you also will have to guard yourself and your heart. Verses 24, the second half of the verse, and verse 25 of that passage we're reading, because he knew all men, for he knew what was in man. So being God in the flesh, Jesus had a perfect understanding of man and all of his sinful thoughts. There was nothing hidden from Jesus. Now we can only see what manifests from a man, right? His behavior. But Jesus knew what was inside of man, his very thoughts and motives. So we have already understood that man is evil. Imagine if we knew what each other were thinking at all times. Jesus did, and still was able to walk in peace with man and even find love for us. If he had used earthly love, he would have rejected us based upon the evil thoughts that he could so plainly see in us. But he loved us with heavenly love, in spite of the evil he perceived. That heavenly love, agape love, caused him to be able to look beyond our humanity to the soul or the spirit inside of us. We look at a passage in Matthew chapter 26, verse 47. While he was still speaking, Judas, one of the 12, arrived. With him was a large crowd armed with swords and clubs, sent from the chief priests and the elders of the people. Now, the betrayer had arranged a signal with them. "The one I kiss is the man. Arrest him." Going at once to Jesus, Judas said, "Greetings, Rabbi," and kissed him. And Jesus replied, "Do what you've come for, friend." Then the men stepped forward, seized Jesus, and arrested him. This is interesting. Even when Jesus was being betrayed by Judas, he still found only love for him and kissed him, calling him friend. So the power that Jesus had to love in spite of evil is the power that we must possess in order to live at peace with all men. Jesus was trying to show us that we can love man while he hates us. Luke 23:34 then said, Jesus, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." This is what he prayed for the very people who were murdering him as they were pounding those stakes into his hands and in his feet. And now there's something about this we need to understand. See, the power of betrayal to destroy us is in the surprise. When we expect all men to be good and never hurt us, or at least even some men, or even one individual, we expect they never hurt us, even our best friend, never, or our wife, never, or whatever, we set the stage for betrayal. And therefore we are devastated when it occurs. Jesus knew it was coming at all times, and therefore had no problem loving the man through which it came. Jesus was not surprised. Jesus knew it. He said, "The thing you're going to do, yeah, go ahead and do it, my friend. Do what you've come for." The one that dips with me, it's the same. Jesus was aware of it the whole time because he knew it was in his heart, and he knew it already developed, and he knew that it was just the way it is. And that's exactly what Jesus is inviting us to understand. If you get this, that your very best friend, you know that best friend you have that will never betray you, never hurt you? Yes, they will. Something is going to go wrong. But what if you decide to live not cynically looking for the evil of everyone, but accepting the fact that all have sinned, and you know everyone is wrong? And what if you decide, you know what, it's just a matter of time. You will betray me, you will hurt me, and I'm ready for it. And when you do, okay, I get it. I can't put it on you. I can't blame you. What freedom you can live in. That's where Jesus lived. You say you want to be like Jesus. Can you do that? Can you develop such a mentality? That is the secret, because the power of betrayal comes in the surprise. What if it doesn't surprise you? What if you expected it? In fact, that is how I have learned to live in every single relationship I have. I know it's just a matter of time. And they give you the speech about how much they love you and how great you are, and cry on your shoulder and say, "I will be with you. I will never leave you. I'm with you. You're this, you're that. You're like my father. You're a spiritual leader. You're this, the other. You're like my best friend." Yeah, give them the right circumstance. They will walk away from you. They will betray you. They will hurt you. They will lie about you. And they will falsely accuse you. And when it finally happens, when people finally do betray, I'm very relieved because, okay, I was waiting for that. It's like the shoe dropping, I'm waiting for the other shoe to drop. It's an expression we say. It's inevitable. It's going to happen. And then I can just keep smiling. But if I have deified humans again, if I put you as my friend up on this high pedestal, finally I have at least one man I can trust. At least one friend will always be there for me, and some other, poetic thought about man. When it does fall apart, when it does go south, then I hate all men. Well, that's not God's purpose. We cannot do that. We must love. And Jesus is trying to teach us these deep lessons. Understand that, yes, it is still painful when they do this, but if you're expecting it, it does not render you unable to continue to love those that betray you. You can love them in spite of it. That's what Jesus was doing with Judas. Although faith in someone is admirable, and we should try to believe the best about all, it's not true. The truth is that we have already seen what we've already seen in this message. So unconditional love is what God expects from us for other men, just like He loves us. The same love with which He loved us, unconditional, unmerited favor and love, is what He demands that we show to others. And this is what it means to love our enemies. And that's what the passage says, that you have heard what is said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute. Yes, so in the old way, you've heard it said, love your neighbor and hate your, is built on that idea that there are neighbors that are good and enemies that are bad. But Jesus is saying they're all bad. So you can love even bad people if you understand this principle, and you can become like Jesus. Unconditional love. Now, for us to live in peace, we have to emulate this concept, and Jesus taught us to do so. You say, well, how can we do that? Well, we go on now. How to live in peace with man. And this is Matthew chapter 10, verses 16 to the first half of 17. What does it say? The scripture says, I am sending you out, as humans with humans, like sheep among wolves. Therefore be as shrewd as snakes and as innocent as doves. Be on your guard. So here he's teaching us something. There are two animals that Jesus tells us we should be like in our relationships with man in order to live in peace. Number one, wise as serpents. Snakes are elusive creatures that are rarely seen in the open. They spend much of their time concentrating on their next meal, and after waiting for the perfect moment they strike. They can sit in a place for days and wait. And so as we look at snakes, of course, I knew a lot about snakes because when I was a boy I was a snake collector, and I collected hundreds and hundreds of snakes over a long period of time. And these snakes would be under logs and around bushes. And I would, if you want to go find snakes, you go to areas where there is water nearby and there is debris covering, like logs in the top. You flip those things over, inevitably you're going to find snakes under those things. And I had one particular time that I flipped over a board and there were 25 snakes under that one board. I was so excited. A brood of snakes. And I was excited because I catch the snakes and I would put them in a bag and then take them home and sell them. And most of them were non-venomous, but occasionally I would catch venomous snakes as well. But snakes are fascinating. They're beautiful. I had pet snakes. I had a speckled king snake, which is a black snake with yellow specks on it, that was so docile and so calm that it would spend time with me, and it would even drink from my glass. If I had water or something to drink, I could put it up to the snake, and the snake would put his head down and suck liquid out of my glass. And he would watch TV with me too. So that creeps some people out. But I know about snakes. And they're saying here that wise, use the wisdom of a snake is what Jesus said. So snakes are hated by most everyone and need to remain careful about where they go too. Why? Because everybody wants to destroy them. And then most people say only good snake is a dead snake, which isn't true. Snakes have a role to play. And if you kill all the snakes, you can end up with a lot of rats. And they will bring diseases, and you end up causing a plague because you killed snakes. So they're almost always killed when they're spotted, so therefore they cannot be spotted by men. They have to hide. They have to be stealth. So we, as believers, are also hated by most. It says the world hates you. If the love of God is in you, the world's going to despise you, and you should be careful about where you go and with what people you mingle. Who knows your whereabouts? Matthew 7:6, we know that verse is clear where it talks about, let me find it. Matthew 7:6, here it is, where the Bible says, do not give dogs what is sacred. Do not throw your pearls to pigs. If you do, they may trample them under their feet and turn and tear you to pieces. So Jesus often warned us about who we trust with our information because he knew what could happen if it falls into the wrong hands. And that's an Old Testament story that I wanted to show you here in 2 Kings chapter 20, verses 12 through 17. At that time, Marduk-baladan, son of Baladan, king of Babylon, sent Hezekiah letters and a gift, because he had heard of Hezekiah's illness. Now Hezekiah received the envoys and showed them all that was in his storehouses, the silver, the gold, the spices, and the fine olive oil, his armory, and everything found among his treasures. And there was nothing in his palace or in all his kingdom that Hezekiah did not show them. So here Hezekiah's being a nice guy. He's opening up to these envoys from Babylon and shows Marduk-baladan's men everything. And then Isaiah the prophet went to him, to King Hezekiah, and asked, "What did those men say? And where did they come from?" "From a distant land," Hezekiah replied. "They came from Babylon." And he goes on to say, the prophet asked, "What did they see in your palace?" "Oh, they saw everything in my palace," Hezekiah said. "There's nothing among my treasures that I did not show them. I was open. I was trusting." Then Isaiah said to Hezekiah, "Hear the word of the Lord. The time will surely come when everything in your palace and all that your predecessors have stored up until this day will be carried off to Babylon. Nothing will be left, says the Lord." Oh my gosh. Of course, he then at that moment, I'm sure, was regretting having ever shown him. But we have to be careful with who knows what about what. We need to be cautious about how open we become to people. Why is that? Because they often will harm us. They will take from us and hurt us. There are certain liberties and freedoms you have that you feel comfortable expressing, but when you put it out in front of people, they turn on you, hate you, and reject you religiously and no longer want anything to do with you. Watch it. Also, when it comes to confessing sins, I think it's a good idea. The Bible says that if we confess our faults one to another and pray for one another, the effectual fervent prayer of a righteous man avails much, and we can be healed and delivered. But be careful. Who? Because not everybody has your deliverance in mind. Some people like to use and abuse and take advantage. And there's con artists out there, and there are people who have these scams, and they develop trust. They want to have confidence. That's what con man is, a confidence man, to get you to begin to build confidence and trust where really their intention is to hurt you. You need to be wise about these things. Isaiah knew it, Hezekiah didn't, but he warned him. The second animal is a dove. It says, harmless as doves. The dove is a simple and gentle bird. They never inflict pain on anyone, even when taken captive in the hands. One could easily kill a dove without much resistance from the bird. I don't know if you've ever held a dove, but I have. And they're very delicate. Once you're holding them, they just stop. They'll never peck at you. They're not going to fight to get away. They're so gentle. And the dove, because of that, has been the symbol of peace throughout the years in many nations. And doves are faithful to their mates and will remain together till death. A man once shot the irritating dove that he heard outside of his window because of the noise that it was constantly making. And the male dove, because he killed the female, returned every day for a year looking for its mate. Because they marry for life, or they pair for life. They are hopelessly faithful. And they are gentle. They never do anything to hurt anybody. So we are to be like the dove in all these characteristics. Simple, gentle, never hurting anyone, peaceful and faithful. Like a snake, at the same time like a dove. So to emulate a dove, we must be like Jesus, who loved all with gentleness in spite of the harm they wanted to do to him. Isaiah 53:7 says, he was oppressed and afflicted, yet he did not open his mouth. He was led like a lamb to the slaughter, and as a sheep before its shears is silent, so he did not open his mouth. And this is what it means to be harmless like Jesus was harmless. Look at Matthew chapter 5, verse 39 through 42. But I tell you, do not resist an evil person, Jesus is telling us. If anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to them the other cheek also. And if anyone wants to sue you and take your shirt, hand over your coat as well. If anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with them 2 miles. Give to the one who asks you, and do not turn away from the one who wants to borrow from you. These words that Jesus speaks, resist not evil, he says. Don't resist an evil person. It's our instinct to resist an evil person. But he says, don't do it. This means to not stand against or oppose. If they're going to do evil, just let them do it. Does not mean that you cooperate with that evil, but it means that you just let people be people. Gandhi put this into practice and changed the nation of India forever. In fact, he brought that freedom to the nation by having this mentality. I don't know if you've ever seen the movie Gandhi. It's a good movie. And how Gandhi grew up and what he developed. And he had a concept of civil disobedience with absolutely no violence. And he was never violent. He was calm. And he let people abuse him. And it was powerful. And he learned it from Jesus. And he said it. In fact, he once said, I too would be a Christian if it were not for the Christians. So his issue wasn't with Jesus. His issue was with the people who represented Jesus in religious realms. And I have the same issues that Gandhi I take with the brothers and the sisters that are not living these principles. And these principles are hard to live if you think like a man, if you concentrate on humanity and you live in that realm. But if somebody wants to sue you for your shirt and take from you, it's better that you be defrauded and let them have it. One time I was talking to a man that came to me and he had this issue and Pastor, I need help, I need your advice, I need your counsel. Please tell me what to do. And I said, what's wrong? He says, well, there's been this bickering, this fighting in my family for years, and my brother and I are at odds, and it's this inheritance, and we can't seem to come up with an agreement about it, and we're fighting, and I just want peace. I said, you want peace? I'll give you the secret to peace. He says, yeah, tell me, Pastor. I said, give your brother everything. And he looked at me, what? I said, just let it all go. I said, I'm telling you, you want peace. You want to be able to rest, put your head on the pillow, and breathe easy. Just give it all to your brother. Give him the whole inheritance. Let him take it. And he said, but it's my inheritance. I said, then therein lies your problem. See, peace is possible, because not everybody's going to want to pay the price of it. It requires that we die. It requires that we yield. It requires that we not see our right as important and not see what we get out of it as important. To live at peace. It's possible, but do you really have what it takes? Can you be like Jesus? In conclusion, living in peace with man is possible if we understand the teaching of Jesus. And more importantly, apply those teachings to our lives. All men are evil in some way. But it's up to us to find the little good within and bring it out of them. Knowing that all will probably betray us, we'll prepare ourselves for anything that comes in life. Pray that God gives you strength to resist your sinful, vindictive nature and your sense of fairness and rightness, and you just let it all go. If you want peace, that's how you get it. Allow yourself to be like Jesus in the relationships with those that surround you. Allow yourself to be able to know what's in man and not commit yourself in these contractual agreements with men. Don't put conditions on people. Just love them. If they slap you, give them the other cheek. Just love your enemy. Do the things that Jesus teaches. Actually do the things that Jesus teaches you, and you will be free. I know it's easier said than done, but I'm speaking as someone who's done it. I've let everything go so many times, and you need to learn to do the same thing. We can live at peace with men, but we need to be like Jesus. So may the Lord give us the ability, the grace, and the mercy to be able to accomplish that.